Juan is a longtime community Juan is a longtime community organizer with a proven commitment to ending systemic discrimination in Salinas, California. He has worked to bridge the lettuce curtain that separates the world-class cultural institutions, healthcare, and distinguished public schools of the Monterey Peninsula from families in the Salinas Valley. Juan has served in leadership roles in public schools as a director for the Pacific Grove Museum of Natural History, and he's a board member of the institutions like the Monterey Bay Aquarium and Stanford University's Hopkins Marine Station. In these roles, Juan has championed legal system reform, particularly public school policy, and has been invited to the White House to discuss strategies to end the school-to-prison pipeline. And tonight, he's here to talk to us about Proposition 36. And welcome, Juan. So happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Julia for setting up the infrastructure. Thank you to Leslie for getting this started. And I guess a thank you to Malcolm for getting this started like 2 years ago when we first jumped onto a Zoom together. So I'm super grateful to be here. I'm excited to talk about Prop 36, not because I'm excited about Prop 36, but because really fired up with the work that we're going to need to do in these next few weeks to put ourselves in a position to stop it. I'm going to share my screen in a second. Before I do, though, I am going to do my best to manage questions in the chat. If something comes up, please feel free to put it in the chat. Also, having been an educator, you can also interrupt me, and I am okay with that. Happy to answer questions in the moment. I just don't want anybody to forget any questions. I know we'll have time at the end, but if the mood strikes. And then I know all of y'all have been studying about this for a while. People have been reading about it, looking into it, and would welcome kind of the other expertise in the room to step in and say, hey, I just heard this in the news today. Oh, I just heard that. Because we're taking this all in at a pretty breakneck speed as we get this rolling. And so super welcome other folks and other voices into this. So let's see how good my technology skills can be here. And perfect. All right, how is that for everybody? Perfect. So not everything that you need to know, in fact, but a little bit of what you need to know today. We want to start with like a quick overview of props. Propositions were kind of created in theory as a form of direct democracy. And really the ultimate intent when they are formed was that citizens could say, hey, we don't like what's necessarily happening in our legislature. We want to put something on there. We don't like one of the laws that is there. Or we need money for something. And this was all an idea that if you got enough citizens together and organized enough citizens, they could have a voice in the process as well. Not going to go too far into this. Long story short, if you get enough signatures, you can put something on a ballot. I think one of the things that we're seeing now is that the signatures, whether you're doing it, whatever cause you're doing it for, takes a lot of time, and as a result, takes a lot of money. And so that idea of direct democracy has become a lot harder for those without money. Those folks have to go out, volunteer, organize, find enough people to get enough signatures to get something put on the ballot. Whereas larger interests, vested interests with a lot of economic power, are able to pay for those canvassers, pay for those signatures in a way that kind of circumvents the concept of this. We see this in propositions, and we see it in things like recalls as well, where folks with money are allowed to influence our democracy with the weight of their money. Won't dive too deep into this. This is kind of like the highlights of all of the bills that we have passed in the past 20 years. A lot of them really not necessarily equitable If you look at some of these, read some of these, we got some pretty brutal propositions that have passed in the state of California. Some of them as recently as 2008 is always the one that shocks me, that we're 15 years removed from people wanting to ban gay marriage. But certainly kind of from my childhood, Prop 187, denying public services to undocumented folks. We've been doing a lot of this kind of work for a really long time. There are some positives. Prop 47 is in here. We'll talk about that in a second. And Prop 6 from 2008, we're going to mention another Prop 6, but Prop 6 from 2008 was also very akin to Prop 36 that we're seeing today. And so I put that on there because that was rejected. People realized that that was a gross overinvestment in policing and prisons. And so there is a history of Californians saying, we don't want that. I think Prop 47 is a different version of that same statement, but naming that right here. So Prop 47 as a basis, trying not to talk too much about Prop 47 in the sense of the focus really is on Prop 36, but you can't understand Prop 36 without understanding Prop 47. Prop 47 really was aimed at reducing just the unhealthy and terrible overcrowding that we had in California prisons at that point. It took what are typically called, and I guess lawyers would use the word, I'm certainly not a lawyer, but something called a wobbler, something that could be either a felony or a misdemeanor, and took nonviolent wobblers and basically took 7 of these and made them misdemeanors. So people aren't necessarily now going to jail, certainly not going to prison. And if they are being incarcerated, it's for much, much shorter periods of time. Not only was this a prospective proposition, it didn't just change things in the future, it also changed things for people who were convicted previously and were currently serving, or at that time serving a term. And so they were able to look back at their case, say this is no longer a felony, this would be a misdemeanor, time has been served, and people were being released. And so really, really good stuff. It reduced prison overcrowding. I will name that, like, we still kind of, to a degree, have overcrowded prisons. It's complicated within the numbers, but we still have prisons that are far too full. It was able to take the money that we put into prisons and bring them out for education programs, mental health, drug treatment programs, re-entry services that allowed people to come home and get in to a much safer and more stable space. And overall, we saw an improvement in public safety. Data is incredibly important. I will say, and I will touch on this a little bit later, data in these arguments is very tricky because this argument is an emotional argument. People's conversations around safety are really emotional. And so while I can, parse out and send, very specific numbers about all of this, I think the important part is we saw a general decrease in crime after Prop 47. As with kind of all things, there are like some types of things went up, some types of things went down, but there was a general decrease overall. Ultimately, from kind of a monetary standpoint, we put over the last 10 years, $800 million back into communities and out of prisons. And so that's just a huge, huge diversion of money from punishment and into enrichment and important kind of programs that actually do make people more safe. So before I jump into Prop 36, I did want to take a breather to see if anybody had any questions, if there were, just wanted to take a beat just in case. Perfect. So Prop 36. So Prop 36 was put together by a variety of groups. spearheaded by prosecutors, California prosecutors, as well as peace officers, different groups in law enforcement, and then funded really heavily by retailers. So Walmart, Target, Home Depot, all got on board to fund basically the signature drive, the creating this proposition, and then getting the subsequent signatures, and now the advertising blitz that we will be inundated with for the next month and a half until Election Day. It was called the Homelessness, Drug Addiction, and Theft Reduction Act. We'll talk about kind of how Prop 36 says it's going to address those things, and talk about kind of why those things don't necessarily match up with what they say they're doing. So we're going to start with homelessness. And there's nothing in Prop 36 that addresses homelessness. There is no provision that, and I think this is actually a great thing. There's no provision in it that criminalizes being unhoused. So that's really great. However, the other things that we get into have actually been shown to increase homelessness. So not only does it do nothing to support those that are unhoused, it actually exacerbates the problem with a couple of the things that we're going to look at in a second. So I will say I can share all this after the fact, so that folks don't have to like copiously read this. I know it's being recorded, so you can come back and look at it that way too. I think the pieces here for me that are important to point out is that it really exacerbates or allows a prosecutor to punish people much more aggressively in certain drug cases. And some of these things could be could kind of, these things can be, well, let's take the having drugs. If somebody possesses any amount of drugs while having a firearm, you can get a felony stacked, even if you lawfully own that firearm, even if you're licensed to carry that firearm. But if you also have drugs on you at the time, you can add a felony to whatever that case is. So I'll be the first to say, I don't think guns make our community any safer. I don't want more guns out there. And finding ways to add felonies to people's cases and sentences is a way to keep them in prison for extended periods of time, decades at a time, which is what the part that I think is very dangerous. There's another piece that gets very scary for people's long-term incarceration around fentanyl. Fentanyl being incredibly addictive is what it is. If you are prosecuted for and charged and prosecuted for selling fentanyl, they will tell you at your adjudication, at your sentencing, that fentanyl is a drug that can kill. That basically one statement in court will allow them to charge you with murder if somebody gets fentanyl from you in the future and dies. Now, again, not trying to encourage any fentanyl use here, but we do see fentanyl as a health crisis, not something that can be punished away. We know that people are addicted to these things, and we know that if you are addicted to something and you get charged with a crime and you get out of prison, you might go back to using that. And when you're using it, you might be sharing it with people. And there isn't necessarily an ill intent, there's just an addiction. And so being able to charge people with murder for these health issues and public health issues is kind of how we're trying to punish our way out of a space that we've seen fail in the past. We've seen the war on drugs fail. We've seen these kind of laws end up with many more people in prison, people not being treated for the substance abuse spaces, and costing us not just money, but lives. And so really see Prop 36's aggressive kind of adding felonies to drug possession charges really, really dangerous. I can, well, let me get through theft really quick. I think there's a simple way to kind of talk about this, in that $950 is the threshold for charging somebody with a felony. The way that $950 is counted is one specific robbery event and needs to be more than $950. Proponents of Prop 36 are saying that there is kind of these strings of like incredibly fine-tuned retail theft gangs that are only robbing up to like $940, and then doing that in a lot of different places with a lot of different people so that nobody is charged with any sort of crime. That's simply not true. Retail theft is punished in a slightly different way and prosecuted in a slightly different way. So for starters, there's that. The second part is that $950 is very little money if you look at kind of how these cases are adjudicated in other states. States that we think of as very punitive, Alabama, Texas, have a much higher threshold for theft than in California. Ours is actually really, really low at 950. Alabama is at 2,000. Texas is at 2,500. So really, we are already very tough on retail crime. In addition to kind of this already very tough threshold, this threshold doesn't change. So as inflation occurs, and as inflation has occurred, it becomes a much, much more strict sentence. On top of that, what Prop 36 would allow prosecutors to do is to string together different charges to add up to $950. Wow. So, question? Sorry. Okay. So let's say you are out of work for a week and somebody is trying to survive. They steal $10 out of a register. They steal food that would be valued at $200. They do this. And if you add these up, and $950 can add up pretty quickly, they will be able to be charged with a felony. Again, things that, don't want to support people stealing money, don't want to support people stealing food. But again, we're trying to punish our way out of a different problem. We're talking about a problem of need. We're talking about a problem for a lot of these folks of making ends meet. Again, this is separate from retail theft crimes, which are, again, prosecuted in a much different way. But this would allow prosecutors to essentially persecute poor people and punish them more extremely for these crimes. It also adds sentencing enhancements. Without diving too deeply into sentencing enhancements, I talk about the felony that could be added if you were carrying a gun. Essentially, there is going to be mandatory years added on certain things now, especially with there's any property damage. Really, this is kind of directly linked to auto theft. And so that $50,000 is kind of a strategic auto theft number that says, okay, if somebody steals a car to do things, we've all seen the news where, cars are used as battering rams or whatever. That's going to be an automatic enhancement. And so a lot of these things are there to basically just increase a prosecutor's power to incarcerate people for longer amounts of time. So a lot there. And gonna stop there. Sorry, we're not gonna go into the C3 and the C4. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'm gonna stop for a second for questions, and then kind of share how we're talking about it at EBC Action Fund. as well as the other place that I work. I work for two different uh, related groups: the Ella Baker Center Action Fund and the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. But pausing there, and then yeah, Brent would love to answer any question if I am able.
Okay, if you are able, can you tell us the difference between how retail theft is prosecuted, or if it's proposed being prosecuted, just for the mom and pop shops who can't afford anything to be stolen from?
Right. And so again, don't want to diminish what is happening to small businesses in any way. Don't want anybody stealing. Um, so I guess two pieces to that. The first is retail theft. We've actually had several bills passed in the legislature this year, kind of thought out, argued over, adopted, and it would be kind of like, as I understand it, it's like the equivalent of like adding conspiracy to a crime, right? Because if you have an organized retail theft crime, then you are working with different people aimed to distribute. Whereas this $950 theft crime is just kind of like money that like kind of like ad hoc robbery, or a robbery kind of in the moment, not necessarily in kind of that broad space. And again, typically in a retail theft incident, you're going to get a lot more than the 950. That isn't one of those things that we're hearing kind of these stories about, like, oh, people are going free after robbing, you know, Prada or whatever those stores are. Those certainly meet all of those different thresholds. Okay, so sorry. Question in the chat from Malcolm: do judges have discretion to convict for misdemeanor or felony? So this kind of changes the law. Like, there was, previously to Prop 47, for these specific charges, because they were wobblers, they could be charged as either. 47 basically said, no, we're all going to put them into the misdemeanor bucket. Now they're saying we're all going to put them into the felony bucket. And so they would all be felonies. Now, I mean, within kind of all of that, you can charge, you can choose to charge, you can choose to adjust people's charges based on plea deals, a bunch of other things. But the actual kind of charge from the prosecutor is going to be that felony.
Thank you.
And yes, sorry, there was a second part of that question. If you burglarize a home, take $950 worth of things, break glasses, you escape, can the judge add years to my sentence? If it was like a $50,000 window, Malcolm, absolutely. I think it, and I think that gets a little scary as we're kind of accounting for damage. Those of us that have needed to get something fixed at home have probably gone to a plumber, somebody else, whatever, and we've gotten quotes, and those quotes can be different. And so now we're looking at, okay, who's deciding what that $50,000 threshold is for that damage? How is that being allocated? So it becomes a little bit more discretionary about how you can add those charges. I will say to Brent's point, I think there are spaces where people are proactively trying to address some of these problems. There is an initiative that EBC is part of. We're called the Smart Solutions Coalition. It's a group of different organizations that are proposing some database solutions, not a database, but data-based solutions to address some of these problems. So again, rather than reliving the war on drugs and increasing penalties for using drugs, taking all the money that's going to cost and putting that into services and support for people. While we're talking about costs, I will name that the election pamphlet that you will receive which gives you kind of the overall cost. And as you're going through each of your propositions, it says, how much is this going to cost? For some of the numbers for Prop 36, it can't even tell a number. Like they can't even project a number. They can only say hundreds of millions of dollars. We've done a little bit of projecting on kind of our side through kind of like, what does it cost to incarcerate a person? What are the projected amounts of increased incarceration? This would cost roughly $4.5 billion a year to put into effect. It would cost $4.5 billion a year. It would lead to the same overcrowding issues that we were facing in 2014 when Prop 47 passed. And so some real heavy costs to California.
I am ready. Yeah. So tell me, how is the heirloom? Is that a seasonal pizza?
Yourself.
The heirlooms sound good.
It's okay.
All right. Any other?
Question
I have a question here.
Yeah.
If someone like Walmart, they report a profit of $3.25 billion a year, and they say one of their most commonly stolen things are baby formula, and the state has already put in for police departments to give extra security $7.1 million. Why can't Walmart basically pay more for their own security?
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I would also argue that a lot of private security can be police officers off duty. And so there's some like very interesting interplays of how private security and public law enforcement work together in that space. So it's a profit center. I would argue that a lot of this is profit centers. As we look at prisons are profit centers for certain special interests. That $4.5 billion a year is going to go into enriching somebody. And it's going to cost the public, it's going to cost taxpayers money to do that. And so, for EBC Action Fund, for EBC, our C3 entity, for us, it's about how do we reinvest in a way that makes sense, that is actually safe for people. Because we get that right now, we don't always have the safest communities, right? I'm in Oakland right now. Typically, I live in Sacramento. I'm in Oakland right now. And I every time I go back to Sacramento, people are like, what is it like? Did you make it? Did your car get stolen? All of these different things, because that is the narrative that they are hearing on a regular basis. And I have a lot of friends who have existed within that, right? That narrative isn't foreign to me. It's not something that I know people that have been pulled out of their cars, whose windows have been smashed. These are not safe communities. But we know that if we can invest in communities, that they can be safer. And we know that when we look at resourced communities, as we look at any affluent community, we notice that they are much, much safer. Their rates of harm go down significantly. And so what we would argue is that $4.5 billion is better spent pouring into our communities, supporting our communities with baby formula, making sure that moms don't have to go into a Walmart to steal baby formula, so that people aren't trying to get food from, a taco shop, a mom and pop shop, anywhere, that they actually have the resources that they need to survive. And it's a lot harder to do that when you're investing billions of dollars for an already cash-strapped state into this.
So if we put billions of dollars into resourcing communities, like drug treatment and
mental health,
education and rehabilitation, rather than waiting till people go into prison. I mean, Brent shared a video that I don't know how many people got to see it, but Gavin Newsom, who, by the way, has come out against this proposition, everybody should know, went to San Quentin, and I think Brent could probably share a lot of comments about this, but one of the things that was really impactful is that he's very proud of the fact that he's going to have a very high-level rehabilitation program going on in San Quentin, which it sounds like a good idea. Of course, we want to see that. We want to see that happen. The question is, and then he wants to take it to scale. And so the question is, why don't we take to scale the rehabilitation and the education in the communities themselves to make it so people don't have to go to prison to have rehabilitation. And we
Right.
also know that prisons generally don't rehabilitate, and there's drugs in the prisons, so people aren't really getting drug treatment because I feel like it's a spiral backwards.
Right. Sometimes prison are worse than the streets. That's why I always advocate for preventative measures. Marshawn Lynch, they spoke with different inmates within the prison, and they just spoke about how when the sports teams left Oakland, the crime went up because the kids don't have anywhere to go. They don't have, the community centers are underfunded. The community mentors that were once in the community are all gone. They're in jail. There are no type of support services for them. There's no jobs for them. Sometimes when they're going home, they don't even have food in the refrigerator. So it's not that they're stealing just to steal for a thrill. Sometimes they're just trying to eat, or they don't have any clothes. And when I was growing up, like Marshawn said, we had community members that took care of us. People wrapped their arms around us. They brought us food. I'm not proud to say some of those community members were some of the drug dealers, but they had codes in the street at the time. And when they all went to jail, the streets just went into chaos. So we're seeing like the ripple effects from that. And then once again, once you do get to prison, it's very hard to rehabilitate yourself. Like I said, it's worse than the streets. The gangs run the prisons. They control the drug trades in there, and it's a little bit more violent than it is on the street. So if we invested a lot in the preventative measures, we wouldn't see all this criminal activity on the streets that are taking place now. So that's why I advocate a lot for preventative funding, healthcare, mental health, workforce development, things like that. And it has to be in the community, and people from the community putting on these programs or having access to the capital to do those type of things. So and then Marshawn and
You went on mute.
Marshawn and the prisoner said they need to invest the money back into the community, and Governor Gavin Newsom agreed. But then also he wants to tackle, I guess, the violent crimes that are taking place now and the theft. So he said he doesn't want to contribute to the cycle that created the situation, but also he wants to tackle the situation now, and then also invest in preventative measures.
Brent, you bring up a good point of something else that not to confuse the matter. There's a lot of sixes happening this year on our ballot. At EBC Action Fund, we're advocating for a no on 36. To complicate matters, while we're not going to be running a campaign around it, we are going to be supporting those that are saying yes on Proposition 6. We talked about how hard it is to kind of meet the parole board standard of rehabilitation while you're inside of prison. One of the things that comes up, we talked about drugs and other things, but one of the big things that comes up is as much as you need to take classes, courses, meet different thresholds to have been deemed rehabilitated and to be released, those do not take priority as opposed to your job. So whatever your work is in prison, that is the place that's prioritized. So it is all of those enrichment spaces, the things that we say like, oh, it's a rehabilitation space. If it was a rehabilitation space, those things might be prioritized more. Instead, it's the work that's prioritized. And to add to that, what is already kind of feels like a slap in the face to folks, when you work in prison, you are working for pennies, literally 16 cents an hour. Now, that is essentially nothing. And what that essentially amounts to is slavery. So Proposition 6 is trying to strike a piece of our constitutional way that allows for slavery still. There's a piece in our California state constitution that allows for involuntary servitude, to be forced to work. And so would encourage folks to vote yes on 6. That would end that involuntary servitude clause that is kind of like a a cheat code to allow the government to continue to institute slavery.
Hey Juan, this is Bobby.
Bobby.
How you doing? I appreciate wanted to first off start out by telling you thank you so much for your presentation, and being able to speak to us tonight about Prop 36. I think it's always interesting. Well, you guys were speaking about babies and baby formula and stuff, and I got my little newborn here, so definitely hits home. One of the things that you were mentioning, just like in titles or the title for the organization, right? Is or not for the organization, but for this bill, it said homelessness and a few other things, right? That it was supposed to be addressing. And I think it actually does address homelessness, because you actually just take people off of the street and lock them away for a long time. So if that's what they meant, then yes, they are actually getting rid of the homeless problem temporarily until, a few years down the road, when people still don't have any other like skills, trades, rehabilitative services, and the problems just continue to compile, like what we've seen in the past. So definitely, it's funny how they do, word plays or make things look a certain way, but that's just my own personal opinion. But what my question is you mentioned something about which people usually respond to, which is like the emotional or the guttural effect, right? Knee-jerk reactions and seeing these laws or seeing these advertisements that are going to be coming out, about this and how this is going to be helpful and all these things. What I would like you to answer is, how do we communicate to our members and to not only within the San Francisco Black and Jewish Unity Coalition, but also just for community members outside of our coalition, how do we negate some of the fear mongering, some of the emotional responses that people have, and how do we help them to see that the things that are being conveyed are not truthful or actual, and not actually helping public safety?
It's a great question, and if Bobby, you ever find the perfect solution for it, I'm going to pay you. Well, I don't have a lot. I am a nonprofit, but I will pay you as much as I can pay you for that one. What I will say is this. I think there is data that shows crime has gone down. So we have graphs that we can point to. We have numbers that we can point to that says crime has gone down. And I think for those of us that oppose these kind of bills, the knee-jerk reaction is always just to say, hey, but look, crime has gone down. And that kind of fact-checking typically isn't helpful within this conversation. What we definitely espouse within the organization, what we share with our volunteers and with folks that are canvassing with us, is to really find that common ground that we all want to live in safe communities. I think, we could argue that versions of safety can look different, but I don't feel like my communities are very safe when officers are coming through and arresting people, checking people, stopping people. To me, that feels unsafe. What I want is a resource community where we don't need officers constantly stopping people, because we just know, hey, people are getting to where they need to get. They have a home that they need to get to. They're going to go do their thing. They're going to go do their business. Like so many affluent neighborhoods in California where you don't see cops, where you don't see police rolling through. You just see people walking in the evening, going to wherever they're going to go. And I think there's a shared common goal for all of us, regardless of how we feel about how we pursue that, of getting to there. And so we really want to talk about that shared vision of a safe community. I think all of Oakland wants a safe Oakland. All of Oakland wants people to have everything they need. And I think that's where we start that conversation. I think once we can get to there, then we can start to talk about, like, what are the services? What are the stories of success where, reentry support, mental health services, those things that a lot of us can connect with, and how those are funded by the savings that Prop 47 made, and how we would lose those if we invested in Prop 36 as well. It is always a tough argument. I think, again, we hold these things very deeply. Feelings of safety are really, really important. Feelings of security are important. And so, for me, it's never discrediting that, making sure we all know that we're on the same page. We want that same thing. And then if all else fails, I go with kind of the intro question of our old executive director, Zach Norris, who would ask people to close their eyes and imagine a safe space. And I would encourage people to do this at some point. And without ruining that for you, because everybody's is going to be different, could then ask the room, how many people had prisons or police in that vision? And no one ever did. You know, we think about our families. We think about being with our loved ones. We think about being in nature and healthy spaces. Those are our visions of safety. And so encourage that. That is less of a policy space, but that is certainly an emotional space to remind people kind of what safety can be and what safety really means.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I did have one other question. I don't know if other people do, but I just wanted to ask you real quickly is speaking of, you know, taking the law now, if this was to pass, right? Prop 36 passes, now it's automatic felonies instead of, you know, whether it be a judge discretion or even misdemeanors. Is there any projections, or what is the Ella Baker Center looking at? Like, how is this going to impact BIPOC communities? Will it have a different impact on certain communities than it does, like specifically in communities of color, than it does in other communities? So.
Great question. So we have done, but not us, like nonpartisan groups have done projections of what this would mean in terms of numbers of incarcerated people, and looking at over the next 10 years, an increase of 100,000 people in prisons and 1.5 people in jails. If we just track kind of what normal incarceration patterns are, they'll track very similarly. They don't project any kind of difference. It's going to be about the same, which means disproportionately it's going to be Black men, brown men that are going to be incarcerated. So it will absolutely affect those communities to a higher degree, and that is a lot of our community members off the streets, right? That is away from home. That's 100,000 people away from their families, away from home, and that is a huge number. Could add to that kind of the cost of what it takes to incarcerate somebody, around $130,000 a year, and how that's double what it would cost us to provide somebody with a full ride to UC Berkeley. So there's a lot of ways that we can frame some of those costs, but it's going to be high, both money and just in human cost.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've got about 10 more minutes. I just wanted to make sure, Malcolm, did you have anything that you wanted to add before about the committee or recent work?
I wanted to say one thing about alternative sentencing. California and San Francisco in particular have done great work in creating alternative courts to keep people out of prison. They don't do a lot of public relations work so that not many people know about it. The person in charge of the alternative courts in San Francisco, Melanie Kushner, is on the steering committee of our Black and Jewish Unity Coalition. So we know a lot about it. And a couple of years ago, she spoke about it and people were fascinated by it. And what it means is that when someone is arrested and charged with drug use, for example, they go to drug court, and that drug court uses resources that are available to try to get that person whatever care and help is needed and avoid sending that person to prison where they may or may not get any kind of treatment for an addiction issue or a mental health issue. There's a women's court. There are, I think, 11 or 12 different alternative courts in San Francisco that do a terrific job of keeping people out of prison and getting them the care that they need so that these people, their lives change completely. They go from being homeless or being active in criminal activities or drug use to being a productive citizen who's a good family person and doing exactly what society wants them to do. And so you look at that and say, then why are we sending so many people to prison? There are alternatives. And the money that we spend, about $12 billion a year in California, think if we took half of that, what we could do for education and mental health, the services that we could provide. And society doesn't understand this. They don't know about it. And it's up to us to defeat bills like Proposition 36 and pressure our government, wherever we are, to spend money on taking care of people and helping them, if they have challenges or problems, become good citizens. It makes for the kind of society we all want. And for reasons that baffle many of us, we just don't do that. The idea is just easier, lock them up, punish people, don't rehabilitate them. And it's crazy. It makes no sense whatsoever. And we need to change that. And it starts here. And it starts with all of us getting involved, writing letters, lobbying, and not allowing this to continue. I'll shut up now. Obviously, I'm pretty passionate about these issues. For those of you who don't know, I moved to New Mexico and I've connected with the Department of Corrections here. And it's the same, everything I'm discussing. They lack resources. It's easy, they have 5,000 people they've locked up, but they don't have the resources they need to do alternatives. They're beginning to start, and it's having a profound impact on reducing recidivism. And so I'm working, I just started this week working with them to change that. This time I'll really shut up.
Oh, love it, Malcolm. Always. This is why I loved our first conversation. I will end with some numbers. The latest poll that I saw out of UC Berkeley showed that Prop 36 is winning. So going to be implemented, with the opposite of what Ella Baker Center Action Fund wants. 56% in favor. So if we get all of the maybes at that point in time, it would still be 56 to 44%. I will say that there are some encouraging signs. As Leslie pointed out, the governor is not in favor of Prop 36. The governor may support kind of some no on 36 things. We're hopeful that there can be space for some sort of push to kind of match the tens of millions of dollars that these other organizations are pouring into. Yes. And I would say it's critical for y'all to have these conversations with folks. These are hard conversations to have around safety. I'm always happy to be a resource. But that we do see it as winnable. We have 5 weeks to go before absentee ballots go out. We see that as time that we can have the conversations that we need to have to start pushing that number. That number started at almost 60% in favor. So we've already gotten 4% down. I think we can get another 4 pretty soon, and then beyond that, we can pull it home. I'm also going to leave our resources in the chat. If you follow elevatorcenteraction.org and elevatorcenter.org and sign up for our mailing list, we will not inundate you. I promise you don't get like 7 emails a day, but you do get updates when things are happening, opportunities to volunteer, those sorts of things. And so would welcome y'all to sign up for those if you're interested. And then, sorry.
Juan, do you have some materials that we can use? Do you have anything that
we do not yet? I said, I mentioned in the beginning that like we're ramping up to full speed. We have those on the way, and I will share those when we have them. But we don't have anything like design drawn out, all of that stuff yet. We're still fine-tuning our messaging.
So then you can let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. I will.
Get something, okay, and we can create some things too out of the materials. If we can get some of your slides, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I will follow up and send a version of this. I have to clip a couple of the internal slides, but absolutely.
I just wanted to add that I had also listened to something that Ann Rubin had sent out a podcast by Tanish Hollins. It wasn't a podcast, it was a video interview, and she's from the California Safety and Justice Organization. If people want to look into that, they have a really, really interesting website. They really talk about the things that we've been discussing, but they also talk about the perspective of the victim. And I think that that's what part of what people are talking about is how do you not, how do we have some empathy for those who are victimized and also promote a compassionate, preventative approach to crime. And I think that, so it's called the California Safety and Justice Organization. And she really makes a very strong case as to how people become more victimized ultimately. More incarceration leads to more victimization, and people get victimized inside, and then the cycle continues outside on the streets. So it's not really addressing the problem, from either side. Although there does need to be people removed from the streets, but we do need to create programs in the communities so that cycle doesn't just balloon.
Thank
That's
you for that, Leslie. If you wanted to hit me up later on, I can give you a little bit more information about not just the California for Safety and Justice Alliance, but that's their California chapter. They also have the Alliance for Safety and Justice, which is on the national level, which is their parent company. I'm actually going with Tanish and about 2,500 other people to march in Washington on September 22nd and September 23rd about exactly what you're talking about the victims perspective. And so if you wanted to reach out to me like via email, or I can give some additional information to our group here about that, because that was an element or a perspective that for years was used to over-criminalize and to put to do the tough on crime, stating that it was that this was going to help the victims. And what the research has shown is that it didn't help anybody, and it actually caused more problems and more victimization, not only of the individuals of the victims of crimes, but also how it perpetuated to children, to families, to all other kinds of things. A lot of what Juan was talking about, as far as what does safety look like, on public safety in the community. So I'll send some of that information out as well, but thank you for hitting on that, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, great.
Last thing, Malcolm, can you show everyone your shirt?
What do you got on there, Malcolm? Oh, is that somebody we know? What? Gone yet? No. Oh gosh.
It's a reminder that this is a very important election, and we could end MAGA forever by strongly defeating them. So please get involved at any level, local as well as national elections. Everybody needs your support, please. And as you may or may not know, our Unity Coalition has a committee that focuses on elections, and you're welcome to work with that committee, doing amazing things. Even if you don't work with that committee, please work with somebody. This is too important.
Amen. Thank you.
And you might have seen he was indicted again today.
Right.
Great.
Amen.
So thank you so much, Juan, for
Juan, that was great.
presentation. And
That was wonderful. Thank
It was
you.
great.
Thank you
We
for
could
having
talk a lot another hour, I'm sure, but it's
me. Yeah,
only
everybody's got to go eat dinner.
right. It's nice to see the baby, Bobby.
nice to see the baby Bobby. Yes. Fantastic.
Great to see everybody. So thank you for coming to the meeting, and I hope it was helpful for you.
Have a great
Thank you,
night.
Julia.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
To be continued, right?
Bye.